Hi, this is Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. So, I've had a lot of things on my mind since getting sick and getting well, and you know how the brain goes around in circles, and you have all sorts of notions and whatnot, trying to decide what I wanted to make a video about. And I have a couple of ideas. So, first, I want to tackle what I think it means to become a human being. Now, I've talked about this in other videos briefly, where when I was a kid, I seemed so different from everyone else that was around me, my family, and all the other people, and so forth. I really felt like I didn't belong, and for a while entertained the notion that I might be from somewhere else, like another planet, be an alien, because I could not make sense out of the differences between me and other people, and the notion of UFOs had come out, etc. And it seemed like a natural train of thought to get started on. And I know there's a fair number of you out there who sort of feel the same way. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many UFO cults and star seeds, etc. Um, and the whole concept of that has really taken hold. I've come to the conclusion that that's not what's going on, certainly at least not for me. I've realized that the problem is my definition of what a human being is to start with. Because in the beginning, I thought that anyone who was in a human body must, by definition, be a human being. Even when their attitudes, actions, perceptions, and so forth were so incredibly different from mine. So instead of deciding or staying with the idea that I was an alien, I decided that I was actually becoming a human being and that not everybody is. And I want to explain what I mean by that. We all know that when we're born, we automatically breathe. We don't have to have anyone teach us to breathe. So there's the assumption that everyone knows how to breathe well. And then, you learn, you take yoga, you do breathing exercises, you find out that there's a lot more to breathing than just, keeping oxygen flowing through your body, that there could be energy attached to your breath, etc. I mean, there's a whole world of potential out there that is beyond just the basic I can breathe, I'm alive because I breathe, I've got oxygen flowing through my blood. And I've come to the conclusion that that's the same for being a human being. That when we're born, we have the potential to become a human being, but not everyone is willing or able to do the work in order to make it happen. Whether this is true or not, I don't know. But it certainly is a way of thinking that helps me to sort of, I don't know, forge a path towards where I want to be and who I want to be. So, in thinking about what I think it means to be a human being, there's a few factors. First, I consider empathy as one of the most important aspects of being human. Now, you don't have to be an empath, like a full on empath, like some of us are, in order to develop empathy. Empathy is something that you can nurture and feed and explore and practice and so forth in order to become less egocentric. It becomes less all about you. You're still the center of your own universe, obviously, because that's where we reside, is in the middle of ourselves. But um, empathy is, as a basic definition, the willingness and the ability to imagine what it would be like in any given situation, would it were it happening to you, and how it would make you feel. I definitely had empathy right from the start. One of the things that determines my actions, how I choose to behave in the world, is based on my empathy. And when people tortured me, molested me, abused me, screamed and yelled at me, punched holes in the walls around me, um, I know from personal experience how that felt, and I didn't like it. Knowing how that felt to me made me not want to do that to anyone else. And that's where I got very confused with people who come from abusive environments like I do, where some of them go on, I don't know, a payback kind of track instead of an understanding of, it's like, if I don't like how that feels to me, why would I do, knowing that, why would I do that to someone else? So it's like, well, it sort of clarifies things for me. I'm not going to do tit for tat, not going to get revenge. Um, Somebody hurts me, I'm not going to turn around and try and hurt them as bad or worse than they hurt me, because, that doesn't move me in any positive direction I want to go. And so that becomes a non-starter. And it's interesting because my second husband, my daughter's father, he would, like, you know, verbally abuse me almost nonstop. He was the one who liked to punch holes in the wall, not punch me, but punch the wall near me, try to make his point. And it was pretty clear that I was the thing he wanted to hit. He was just resisting the urge to hit me, for which I'm grateful, but it really is not any less violent to have somebody punching a wall and putting a hole in it, knowing that it's your face that they're thinking about when they do that. It is still an act of violence. And he would try to engage in argument with me. I actually argued with him quite a bit because I wouldn't back down from certain things and stood my ground to try and maintain my independence and being myself, which was quite infuriating to him. But there were certain kinds of arguments that I wouldn't participate in, and that would infuriate him even more, which I thought was interesting. He started yelling and screaming at me one day that I must have thought that I was so much better than him that I refused to bring myself down to his level in order to participate in the argument. And I'm like, it for me had nothing to do with that. It's like, I'm just not going to do the same thing because I know how it feels. So it was an interesting experience to see someone's emotional reaction to not participating in a fight. And I had sort of a weird little thing when I was a kid that sort of set the stage for that, I think. My sister and I were having some kind of a fight, and she was hitting me, and the whole thing just seemed so incredibly absurd suddenly that I started to laugh. And the more I laughed, the more she hit, and me laughing infuriated her. I don't know if she thought I was laughing at her, which could be, but I just couldn't stop laughing no matter how much she hit me. Um, it just seems so senseless and silly. So I think that one of the things that we deal with as we're trying to evolve into ourselves is the idea of what other people think of us and that other people are being critical and judging us for whatever we think is wrong with ourselves. And the voices start coming in and telling us, the usual kind of disconnected and uninspired and unhelpful narrative that there's something wrong with us, that people hate us. And of course, I went through that, especially considering the fact that I had some pretty solid evidence that something must be wrong with me and that people and maybe even the entire universe must hate me for allowing all these things to happen. I went through stages in my youth where I yelled at the universe rather loudly and, chewed it out for doing this to me, which of course it wasn't the universe doing this to me, it was people. And trying to get to a different place from all of that, it's certainly been quite a challenge, quite a journey to do so. One of the ways I think that we can develop empathy is by having pets. Um, because having a pet, a consciousness around you that doesn't judge, doesn't care about anything except being with you, being fed and safe and so forth, allows us to sort of get out of ourselves a little bit, even if it's only briefly, and leave all of the confusion, voices, inner dialogue, and stuff behind when you're watching an animal at play or, whatever it is that they're doing. It can be engrossing and enjoyable and externalizing. Because one of our issues is all the internalizing that we do, and we take everything in and then try to make sense out of it and make a narrative out of it and all this other stuff. It's really hard for us to let go of the idea of having a narrative. So empathy is definitely one of the key components, I think, to becoming a human being. The other is the ability to look at yourself and accept yourself for where you're at and who you are. And that is very hard for a lot of people. My father, he was an alcoholic, a sadist, a misogynist, a racist, every kind of an ist you can think of, pretty much, child molester. Um, and he absolutely and categorically refused to acknowledge that he was an alcoholic. That was one of his lines in the sand, I guess. Even on his deathbed, he was dying from lung cancer and had a tumor in his lung. And one of my sisters went to visit him, and he affirmed to her that there was no way he could be an alcoholic because his liver was fine, even though he was dying of something else. And that insistence of ignoring, holding at bay, refusing to look at the reality of what he was doing to himself and others was very sad to me, that he couldn't do that, and made me think about why. And I came to the conclusion that the reason why people don't want to acknowledge their failings and problems, challenges, whatever you want to call them, is this notion of, if I acknowledge that I've, in my father's case, been an abusive father and an alcoholic and so forth, then that means that all those years have been a waste. And I think the fear of that acknowledgement for a lot of people outweighs the notion that if you can accept and acknowledge that, that means you can change and move forward, and then the rest of your life will not be a waste. And then what you did and what happened to you will also no longer be a waste because you learned from it. That's what I got out of that. With all the things that have happened to me and that have been done to me, etc., um, if I learn something that I can use from the experience, then it doesn't become a black hole, a void, a waste, a horror. Um, doesn't mean I forget it. Doesn't mean that it wasn't horrific to go through at the time, but it means that it gives me something to hold on to that then I can use to move forward and become more of myself and who I want to be. So, self reflection and self acceptance is another, I think, important part of becoming a human being. And, you know, blame and guilt and all the other things that are associated with that can get tricky. I had I picked up this tape when I lived up in the Kispiox Valley. It's supposed to be one of those subliminal tapes, to help get positive stuff in your head. And I wouldn't pick up one of those unless I could actually see the transcript or hear the transcript of what they were actually saying. Because if I was going to put something into my head, I wanted to have the right of refusal. So one of the reasons why whenever I share an exercise with you guys, I always tell you first what it's going to be before I do a meditation practice or something, so that you have an idea of whether or not it's suitable for you because you know yourself better than I do. So I bought this tape and I played the audio side that had what the guy was saying underneath the music on the other side, and I threw it away because there was this weird thing in there about even if you're the most horrific person, like you've molested someone or murdered someone, you shouldn't feel any guilt and you should, and that's okay. You should just accept yourself. And I wholeheartedly disagreed with putting that notion in my head, especially being a victim of, abuse. Uh, so whether or not that would be a good idea, I don't know, but it certainly was not a good idea for me. And I think that is part of the other one of the other pieces of becoming a human being is self-determination, conscious self-determination, where you become responsible for your own evolution, your own development, your spiritual, physical, and mental well-being. Um, and it's not up to someone else to save you, fix you. I think this is one of the reasons why cults are so popular. There's so many different kind of cults out there. There's the UFO cults. There's the um, I can't even think of all the terms that they have out there. The twin flames, the twin rays, the twin souls, the all of those speak to the idea that we are incomplete in and of ourselves. We need something else outside of ourselves in order to become better. And I think that's not true. I think that is a big, huge trap, whether it's religion or spirituality or whatever. If we are incapable of making our own decisions and choices and deciding who we want to be without some kind of external validation or some saving force, be they gods or aliens or whatever, we are selling ourselves short and we are not walking a path of becoming a human being because we don't think we can on some level. We're looking outside of ourselves for that. And again, I think that is probably scary notion for a lot of people, because the notion that you can do it yourself, that you need to do it yourself, which is a huge responsibility. You have no one else you can blame, um, you know, and it's all up to you. But I think that's important. We talk about self definition and self determination a lot. And it's not an easy path, it's not an easy thing to do. It takes a lot of effort and awareness and persistence and consistency and forgiveness when you fail to get where you want. So I think one of the other parts of this is the idea of perfection. That I think is a dangerous notion. The idea that we can become some perfect evolved being of light or whatever, and never have anything happen to us ever again that's uncomfortable or discombobulating, or unexpected, that we'll always know when danger is coming, that we'll always be able to avoid it, that we won't have any conflict. And that if we were perfect, then that's how it would be. When I was a kid, with my exposure to Christianity, the idea of being perfect was something I kept trying to aspire to. I had this notion that if only I were perfect, a perfect person, then there'd be no conflict around me. There'd be, no fighting, no arguing, no yelling, no screaming, no horrible things happening in the middle of the night, no beatings. Um, and yet that never worked because I always failed to be perfect. Because, I would get mad and then that would blow the whole thing. I actually had a diary. I kept a calendar trying to see how many days I could go without being angry. I had aspirations. And that didn't work. And I think that that's because the notion of perfection is in itself a bad idea. Because if you think about if something is perfect, that implies that there's nothing else that needs to change. That it has completed the most complete it can ever be, which means there's no forward movement, there's no growth, there's no learning, there's nothing left to explore or be. Um, and that sounds more like death to me than anything. I mean, actual death seems less like that kind of death, because in physical reality death, things are constantly transforming and becoming something else. There's constant movement. There's always some movement going forward, changing into a different state, or, becoming a different thing, or being incorporated by something else and becoming a part of that. There's really no such thing as perfection in the real world. And it seems that part of our issue has to do with feeling separated from the real world and not feeling really a part of this, the reality of physical reality of being part of a biosphere, being from here. Um, this is our home, this is our space, this is ours to take care of, our problems to solve. They're not anyone else's, and no one is coming to save us. The only thing that can save us is ourselves. Whether we succeed or not is a whole different issue. But I think the more of us become aware of that and work towards that, the better chance we have of actually maybe accomplishing something that will be sustainable. So choosing who you want to be and working towards that, and then forgiving yourself when you fail and picking yourself up and trying again, not trying to be perfect, being okay with making mistakes. That's how we learn. We make mistakes. And if we can't learn from our mistakes, we are definitely not ever going to evolve. Accepting the world for what it is, and that includes the fact that some of the people that live here um, will never be able to become human beings because they are incapable of empathy. That would be the sociopaths. I don't know that it can be acquired or learned. Someone who's a sociopath has something wrong with the way their brain works, and they cannot access those kinds of feelings that the rest of us can. And they will definitely broadcast who they are if we pay attention and listen. They are the hazards among us. But we shouldn't let them stop us from becoming human um, to the best of our ability. And the best revenge against a sociopath is to not give them any energy. They hate that. Because, for them, the only thing that exists is themselves and their brilliance and their ability to trick us. So we take that away, they have no power. They only have the power that we give them in the first place, and their ability to manipulate our feelings, especially guilt and the feeling of inadequacy, the needing to be saved by something higher than ourselves. They make the best cult leaders. And I think just about every single cult leader out there is a sociopath. Otherwise, how could they do what they do? How could they fool their people, convince them to kill themselves, to give away all of their money with some weird intellectual notion that if you're divested of physical reality and monetary wealth, etc., and possessions, that somehow you can become more evolved while you're freezing to death, starving to death, or whatever they have planned in order for you to prove yourself. Doesn't make sense. So any organization out there that wants you to give them total devotion and everything you own is a serious red flag and probably run by a sociopath. So do yourself and the rest of the planet a favor and do not give them anything. You have what you need within yourself and within the life that you're living. You do not need an organization out there to make it happen for you. You do not need someone who is more evolved. And I disagree that any of those people are more evolved because of how they treat their followers. And the fact that they need them in order to feed their ego says they are not evolved. Um, so, and one of the other things, like, self-determination means trusting your instincts and your intuition. We have good intuition. We can use that trying to figure out the difference between a working edge of discomfort because we're suddenly going into a place in our own minds, perhaps, or our life experience that is going to have some uncomfortable revelations that we're going to have to face, and someone putting in the idea that we have to do something we don't like in order to evolve. Those are two separate things. Which is why I did that video on discernment. And the idea that we touched on earlier, I got that stuck in my tooth. Get in there. Um, I lost my train of thought. That's pretty funny. Well, I guess we'll see if it comes back. Okay, so the idea that there is no conflict in our lives if we are evolved, I think is also a wrong notion. When I was with my second husband, I had a rather vivid and important dream experience that has impacted my life since I had it and given me a certain perspective on things. And in that dream, I was on one side of the mountain and I needed to get to the other side of the mountain by going through the mountain. And I would go through the mountain and I would hit like a huge, like a trap or a block or some conflict or something like that. And then I would go back and then I, would come out on a certain spot on the other side of the mountain. Then I went back and started over again and went a different way. And I would meet different conflicts or blockages or traps, and then I would end up at the same place on the other side of the mountain. I did this over and over and over again, seemed like forever, trying to find a path through the mountain that did not have any kind of conflict that, or trap, and I couldn't find one. And I always ended up in the same place on the other side. So my conclusion of that has to do with the idea that we have fed ourselves this story that if we are perfect, if we are evolved, if we are completely in sync all the time with everything that there is, that the universe isn't going to have any surprises for us in a negative sense. There'll only be positive things. And I don't think that's true because we live in a very vivid and tumultuous environment. And there will always be some challenges. The trick is to learn how to adapt and um, respond rather than react to the challenges that we face. Learn from the experience and then move forward. Sometimes I can see trouble coming and I know that trouble is coming and I can see a way to avoid it. There are some kinds of trouble that I can avoid. Interpersonal trouble is often one of them because if I'm paying attention to the input that I'm getting from all of my senses and so forth, and recognize another person as someone who's not good for me, for where I'm at, or where I want to be, or where I want to go, then I can take steps to distance myself from that individual and keep myself safe. But that isn't always possible. Sometimes things come up. You always have to be paying attention to your environment. Driving, for example. There are so many people out there who all have their own thing going on. Some of them are tired, some of them are distracted, some of them are angry, some of them are paying attention, most of them are not. Um, and if you're not paying attention to everything that's going on around you, you're going to end up getting hit. And so, alertness, awareness, focus, um, attention, being in the moment, these are your best resources for avoiding as many of these potential hazards as possible. But it doesn't mean that all of them will be avoided. You have your genetics that come with the body that you inhabit. You have the habits that you've developed and chosen to do, some of which harm the body that you have, which will cause you health problems in the future if you're not paying attention. And if you're not willing to stop doing something that's harmful to you, I mean, there's just so many different factors that are there. And the more aware you can be of how what you do affects you and your life and your environment, the less surprises you will have. But then there are large things that take place that you have no control over because there are, after all, almost 8 billion other people going through the same kind of thing, some of them, all with their own perspective, their own needs, their own desires, their own confusions, their own guilts, their own prejudices and whatever else they might have, um, judgments, etc. And you're one, there are many, and you have to pick and choose the path you follow and what you choose to confront. That doesn't mean you're helpless or that it's pointless. It just means you have to be focused and conscious of the decisions and choices that you make. So, and being okay with making mistakes helps, because if you try something and it doesn't work, it may be you're not suited to it. Your particular skill set is not one of the things that that thing needs. It could be you're confused about what you need to be doing. Um, I mean, it could be an opportunity to learn something new or not go that way because it's not you. And that's where I think the heart comes in. I talk about following a path of heart, and feelings, I think, are more important than intellect. I think intellect can get us into a lot of trouble. It can be interesting and fascinating. We can go down all kinds of rabbit holes. But if it's not going to lead to a place that's going to make you feel um, like you, or leads you to a place that you know is wrong for you, then it's just an exercise and probably a waste of energy and time. This path is, in my opinion, not about learning how to control other people, other beings. I think we need to start looking at the notion of collaboration rather than the idea of survival of the fittest, and that competition evolutionary model, because in reality the whole planet is involved in everything that's happening, and things that affect one end of the planet can directly affect the other end. I mean, it's like everything is connected. And so if we see our lives and what we're doing more as a collaboration with those we've chosen to be close to and allowed in our circle, um, the nature that we have around us, the forces that are arrayed out there, and so forth, and find out ways that we can cooperate and collaborate to move things in a better direction. I think that's a better model for an actual civilization. I find it interesting that a lot of spiritual and religious people are extremely concerned about what they consider our potential lack of ethics. And because we don't have something written down and a list of do's and don'ts, particularly, they're worried about what we might do, given the freedom to choose for ourselves, which is why I'm talking about this subject, because if you are a true human being, they have nothing to worry about. I believe in self-defense. I believe in protecting my body, my house, um, my integrity of me. If it is threatened, if someone is trying to take something that is irreplaceable from me, like, a piece of myself, I will defend it. But I don't go looking for a fight. Most of the time, they don't come up. That doesn't mean I won't or can't defend myself. And I do my best to not harm other things, but I have to eat and breathe. And there's no way to be in a state where Nothing I do is going to potentially harm some other living organism. Every time you take a breath, you're killing who knows how many billions of bacteria. Um, so I don't think along those lines because it's not productive. And I live in a biosphere. I do my best. I plant my flowers. I pull my weeds. Not everything is equal in my eyes. When it comes to my garden, the rest of the planet can do whatever it wants, and I'm fine with that. But that idea of trying to be in control of everything, I think, is part of the problem a lot of people have. I think that's where all the isms actually come from. Fear and lack of control. People who are afraid of gays, I don't understand why, unless they think they might be one and they don't want to face the reality of that because people are minding their own business and having their own lives. Why should you care? There's a lot of that kind of stuff in our society at large that makes no sense to me. But again, you have to choose what you're going to fight or try to impact. Fight's probably the wrong word. Influence, maybe. Um, what you're going to put your energy into. And we all have different reasons for being here. We're all here to learn something slightly different. And that's one of the things I like about this path is that it becomes so uniquely you. Your strengths and weaknesses both impact where you end up and what you decide to do with your life, with the life that you're in. Being in the moment and being in the life instead of worrying about the past or allowing the past to adversely affect you because it wasn't fun, worrying about the future and whether we're still going to be here in 10 years, 1,000 years, tomorrow, it doesn't help. The only thing you can impact or influence is the state of mind that you happen to be in right this minute. And if you like where you're at, that's fantastic. If you don't like where you're at, do something about it. Take steps to change it. And know that those things don't change overnight. And it's okay. Incremental change is still change. So, that's probably enough for this video. I think I made my main points. I guess I'll find out if you guys have any questions. And if you think I'm a crackpot, that's okay. These are, and always have been, just my thoughts and my perceptions on things. And if they help you think differently and have value, that's good. And if they don't, that's okay too. Because I'm not talking to every person on the planet. I'm talking to whoever wants to listen, and to any of you that hear my words, know that it'll work and you'll be okay. You just have to work at it. So, blessed be everybody. This is Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. If you want to send me a message, siofrasmagicalcove@gmail.com. Bye for now.